Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you all for joining us today. We're really excited to have such great participation. And we are going to be graced by a fantastic panel today, starting off with Greg Moffitt of MIT. He'll be providing a demonstration of MIT's informal international collaborations tool, followed by Lisa Nichols, Executive Director, Research Security at University of Michigan, and also our co-chair. She'll be providing a presentation on the Institutional International Agreement Risk Assessment Matrix. And that is for sponsored and unfunded agreements, gifts, or outside activities. This was established at the University of Michigan, and it was further refined and adapted by our very own FDP Research Security Subcommittee. Also today, Doug Backman, Director of Compliance, University of Central Florida, one of our co-chairs, will be helping moderate questions. I will as well. And actually, we have been also graced by Mark Sweet has also joined us, our third co-chair, who can now make it today. So next slide, please. I'll give you a quick overview of our agenda. Oh, Sarah, next slide, please.
Do you not see it?
Oh, no, but maybe that is my, okay, it's okay. Very quickly, if you guys can everyone else see it?
Let me restart it.
There we go. Now we can. Okay. Great. So we kind of have a jam-packed agenda. Again, Greg will be providing the first presentation on the International Collaborations Tool, followed by Lisa's presentation. Then we will open it up to questions. We really want to hear from all of you. What tools and resources have you developed at your institution? What lessons can we learn? And really foster a nice discussion here in today's webinar. And then there were also many areas of interest noted during registration. We actually had almost 500, I think. We did hit 500. Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, participants today for today's webinar. So we have some slides covering some of the really high level kind of thematic areas that emerged, and we will try to address all of those if we have time. So very quickly, I'm just going to do brief intros. Gregory Moffitt became MIT's Chief Research Compliance Officer in September 2020. He positioned within the Office of the Vice President of Research. Greg coordinates development, implementation of export control, conflict of interest, research security, and other research compliance programs across MIT. He collaborates with the Institute's Office of General Counsel to interpret federal policies and regulations and monitors the evolving regulatory compliance landscape. He's also responsible for evaluating Institute activities to identify and mitigate any compliance risks in collaboration with the Institute's school and research components, among many other activities. And we're very excited to have you here today, Greg. And then very quickly, I'll just give a few little tidbits on Lisa Nichols. Again, Executive Director, Research Security at the University of Michigan. She has oversight of research security, research information security, export controls, and conflict of interest. She has served as a principal investigator on actually one of NSF's cooperative agreements to develop the research security training modules, which just were released a couple months back. And she's also participated in the development of National Security Presidential Memorandum 33, which we're all very familiar with as a White House staff member. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Greg. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Sarah. And thanks everybody for participating this afternoon. At a prior FDP session, I happened to mention this informal international collaborations tool that we've developed here at MIT. And there was some interest in just learning a little bit more about that. So I'm going to just take a short amount of time to talk about it and answer any questions you might have. Specifically, when someone signs on to the international collaborations tool, they get this notification, right? That basically it's to help the individual researchers in their informal collaborations to navigate the laws, regulations, other agency requirements that may apply to that collaboration, even though it's not under the MIT umbrella. If it were a formal collaboration, we have other processes at the Institute that we would use that would essentially address these and other questions. It then goes through and says, these are the types of things that might constitute an informal collaboration with some international partners, speaking engagements, maybe co-authoring an article, or simply sharing ideas and data, right? The important thing is that there's no MIT agreement. But it points out to folks that, in fact, they may still be subject to the same type of legal requirements that would apply if they were going through the institute's channels for an institute-sponsored agreement. And then what we're trying to do is we're trying to encourage folks to use this, again, for their protection, and so that they get some guidance before they kind of plow into some type of collaborative activity, only to find out or not find out that there might actually be some concern about it. We do try to endeavor to respond to all those requests within a single business day, and our track record on that is pretty good. And then finally, although I happen to be a lawyer, I don't work for our Office of General Counsel, and our team, as Sarah indicated, we work for the Office of the Vice President for Research. So we do want to highlight this is a kind of quick look, and it's not a full legal review. As Sarah moves us on to the next slide, I have to say I can take very little credit for the development of this tool. It is actually the brainchild of Janet Johnston, who some of you may know. She's MIT's senior export control officer. She was talking about this before the pandemic and before I actually got to MIT, because there were a couple instances where we had to make disclosures to the Department of Commerce because people inadvertently sent materials to organizations that were on the entity list. And she wanted to give people an opportunity to check that out before they started down a dangerous path. And then for the development of it, Carol Wood, who is MIT's Director of Research, Administration, Systems, and Support, she and her team actually built this tool. It is a homegrown tool. I will just tell you, we actually built this off of the same kind of cyber backbone that we use to record PI's disclosure of international agreements to which they are a party, which we now need to disclose to NIH. So it was basically repurposing the same underlying structure. So there's a short series of questions when somebody decides to utilize the tool. There's a short series of questions that we require them to answer, including the subject matter of the collaboration. And you can see there on the screen, that's a very generic, what's the subject area? Is it something like quantum computing, AI, robotics, mechanical engineering, et cetera, et cetera? And then what are the types of interactions? I kind of went through a bit of a laundry list. Is it a speaking engagement, co-authorship, use of facilities or equipment? And is it a current, is it a proposed, or is it a past collaboration? And we have actually gotten some folks who, once we stood the tool up, have said, well, I've been involved in a collaboration for a year or so. And so we've answered questions in respect to all three of those temporal categories. Let's go to the next slide. These are the only remaining questions they have to answer. One, we do ask for a specific name of somebody as a collaborator, and then to the extent they know, is it a U.S. person? Is the person not a U.S. person, or possibly they don't know? We're not suggesting they have to go out and make inquiry of that. And similarly, we ask them for the name of the collaborator's affiliated entity. Again, is that organized in the United States? Is it external to the United States, or maybe they don't know? And what, to the extent they know that, what's the country involved? Those are the only questions they actually have to answer in order for the system to then push it on to the export control team. I can actually, I get notification of all of these, as well as our compliance coordinator. And as I said, one of us, what we essentially do is we take a look at the due diligence tool that we use for kind of our first level looks, which at MIT, we happen to use the Descartes visual compliance tool. And then we'll tell them, in very rare instances, if there is a significant legal compliance issue. We've only had one or two where we've said, you just can't proceed with this. We've had some where we might say, this entity is on the entity list. Their there is a possibility that you can collaborate with them, but why don't you give us a call and we'll talk about what some of the concerns, restrictions would be. Or even in instances where it's not on any restricted list, but it has attracted attention, say because it's called out on the ASPI list, that obviously you can access through the visual compliance tool. We'll call and say, we would just like to chat with you about what some potential concerns are. And those have been pretty productive conversations. Nobody has kind of really reacted harshly to it. And in fact, a few folks have said, even where there's not a legal restriction, they've kind of looked at, the balance of opportunity and risk and said, maybe I'm not going to go there. Just before I wrap up here, there are a few more questions we ask, but the PI or the other researcher, anybody at MIT who can get behind the MIT firewall can use this tool. So students can use it. But let's go to the next slide and I'll show you the other questions we asked. None of these have to be answered, but they could be helpful in determining exactly what the entity in particular is that we're talking about. First of all, is it an entity that maybe has a formal or legal name, but it's also more commonly known by some other name? We ask for address information if they have that available. If it has a parent organization, again, if our researcher knows that, again, what the country of that parent organization is. And in some instances, maybe there's a prior name. And again, we ask for the collaboration period. What was the start date? What's the anticipated end date, et cetera, et cetera. And if they wish to, they can upload attachments. As I say, this was built essentially with a different skin on the same kind of underlying architecture that we use to collect those international collaboration agreements for PIs and other researchers for NIH purposes. So that's it. It has been, it's been a pretty successful venture so far. As I say, we've not gotten any negative feedback on it, and we have gotten a fair amount of positive response to its use, and we've seen some return users. The final thing I will say is, one of the values of this is that when the researcher puts the information in, we then do save all that information in a database. So let's assume that 6 months from now, an organization or possibly a person who is not somehow restricted at the time the researcher puts the information in goes on to some restricted status at a future date. We're able to get back to the PI or other researcher and say, hey, something's changed. You need to be aware of this. We haven't had much occasion to do that so far, but I suspect it will happen at some point. With that, I will turn things over to Lisa, and I think we're going to take some questions later on. Thanks.
All right, thanks very much, Greg. So to better understand our portfolio of international research sponsored awards and unfunded agreements from the perspective of research security risk, we created the International Agreement Risk Assessment Matrix last summer and applied it to current awards and agreements from foreign countries of concern. So the matrix, which has been, as Sarah noted, refined and adapted by the FDP Research Security Subcommittee, can be used for research security risk reviews of sponsored and unfunded agreements, gifts, or outside activities. It establishes a risk score of low, moderate, or high, but initially included and is also conducive to numerical scores. The matrix is available on the University of Michigan website for institutions to use and adapt to meet their needs. And I include the link here. And as Sarah mentioned, we're also going to have these slides available on the FDP website under events, so you'll be able to access it there as well. Can we get to the next slide? Thank you. So this is the matrix, and I know that it's, hopefully you can see it well enough on this slide. but it's essentially, to a certain extent, it mirrors federal concerns and risk considerations. In particular, the columns on the left-hand side of the matrix, and also includes factors that are specific to the PI institution and agreements on the right. So just to start with the first factor on the left-hand side, it's country and whether the country is comprehensively sanctioned, whether it's a country of concern per the CHIPS Act or a country of particular concern per the State Department. And the individual who's using the matrix and scoring the agreement or proposal, for example, would indicate the level of risk at the bottom for all of these different factors, and then can also place notes there, for example, which country we're referring to for this particular agreement or proposal. The next is source of foreign funding. Is it a country of concern foreign government or a country of concern foreign entity closely affiliated with the foreign government or military, or not affiliated with the foreign government or military to the extent that that can be established? Presence on entity and related lists, so the results of restricted party screening. Also, is it on this list? And now I can't see it on my screen, and I apologize. I can't remember the full acronym. So, but the NSCMIC list, which is included in the DoD matrix, and then also the list that was developed in response to the fiscal year 19 National Defense Authorization Act, Section 1286. That list of institutions that was included in the June 2023 document that DoD published and also in their matrix, and then also the list of foreign talent recruitment programs from that same list, as well as the ASPE tracker. The next column or factor is indicators of a malign foreign talent recruitment program as indicated in the definition from section 106.3.8 of the CHIPS Act. So whether indicators are present or absent. The next involves critical or emerging technologies, and that's in reference to what we know is a consideration for the Department of Energy. And so is it present on the list that's published by the White House, the National Science and Technology Council? I believe the latest version is from February of 2022, or similar technology, or is it a STEM field? Thank you for that. It's the non-SDN Chinese Military Industrial Complex Companies list, which is a lot to say, even if you can see it in front of you. So thanks, Sarah. And so the next factor, the next column is U.S. federal agencies that fund the PI. So where do they get their funding? What kind of research are they conducting? Is it DoD and DOE funding involving critical or military research, for example? The research stage, is it applied or basic? The potential for risk to the individual or institution, including reputational. I think this is a nod to MIT's report and approach. And then other publication or data restrictions and then also the presence or absence of a termination clause. And so all of this, again, the individual who'd be completing this would fill out kind of the risk level and notes, indicating, what these particulars are for each factor and essentially how that risk determination was made. And then, if a particular agreement includes a lot of like higher level concerns or higher and moderate level concerns, then that's something that, could potentially be escalated to the Office of General Counsel. And I can talk a little bit more about that. So we're currently using this tool for proposals with foreign country of concern sponsors, including if the parent, not just the direct sponsor, is in a foreign country of concern, and for unfunded agreements with foreign country of concern entities. In terms of process, proposals and agreements are flagged via automated weekly reports. They're not held for review prior to proposal submission or initiation of agreement negotiations. And again, we're focusing on agreements with foreign country of concern entities. We have a policy analyst reviewing agreements and making an initial assessment, which is then reviewed by senior staff. Activities of potentially higher risk or sensitivity, again, may be elevated to the Office of General Counsel and other senior leaders if needed. Additional details may be sought from the PI with joint discussion on how to move forward. If, for example, as Greg mentioned, the organization, the entity was found to be on one of these lists, but not necessarily, there aren't necessarily export control or license requirements, but certainly there are other considerations. So I'll just say that we found that institutionally negotiated awards and agreements to be of relatively low risk versus, for example, outside activities that are negotiated, that are not negotiated through the institution. With that said, situations can certainly arise where a researcher proposes, for example, to share data or materials with an institution on, for example, the DoD 1286 entity or other lists. While that activity might not be prohibited or require a license upon further review, the sensitivity of the data or materials, the PI's portfolio of sponsored research, whether funding is involved, and other factors need to be considered. Some institutions may have an outright prohibition on collaborations with entities on some of these lists, but others, and we do make case-by-case determinations. So we are following the guidance of federal agencies in terms of trying to keep research as open yet as secure as possible. And I just want to note, if we can go to the next slide. You're not going to be able to read this well here, but I just wanted to note that there's a second page of this matrix, and it includes kind of an overview, explanatory information, and also the footnotes and the applicable links on that page. So again, you can find that on Michigan's website. Can we go to the next slide? So we had asked registrants, participants, what they were most interested in hearing about and what topics and tools were, what information was of most interest to them. And so I hope that what we heard and what we hope we addressed in our presentations is who's conducting the assessments, what is the feedback to the PI, lessons learned, conclusions drawn, best practices in assessing these types of agreements, the process behind the development of the tools. If deemed high risk, does it still move forward? And if it's denied based on the risk, what has been the cultural impact, as well as collaboration with countries of concern? And to the extent that you have additional questions or we have not answered some of these questions, we're happy to do so now. And with that, I just want to thank you and turn it over to Sarah. Thanks a lot.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Lisa. So it looks like some questions are coming in at the moment. Let me turn it over to Doug now. We'll definitely take live questions first. And then if the questions stop flowing, then we will revert to some of the issues that were raised upon registration. So over to you, Doug.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Greg, these first two are for you. Can you give more detail about when a person enters the system? Do they enter it whenever they are beginning a collaboration, or do they get prompted at some point to enter data here, like during a proposal submission?
Thanks, Doug. So they never get a system generated prompt to enter information into the informal international collaborations tool, because the tool was designed really to be simply an aid. And it's not part of the processes that MIT uses when the institute is entering into the agreement. So for, say, a specific piece of sponsored research, it's just an available tool for them. I, of course, hope they use this as early in conceiving of some proposed activity as possible, if only to save, if there should be a problem, to save people, the intellectual and emotional kilocalories that might be expended going down a path only to be told later on, this is a problem. We just try and get people to use it. We encourage people to use it early and often.
Okay. Another question, Greg, was how is the informal international collaboration tool publicized or promoted?
whenever and wherever I and the rest of the research compliance team get the opportunity to do it. So when it was launched, my boss, the vice president for research, Maria Zuber, and the vice provost for international activities, Professor Richard Lester, they actually sent an institute-wide letter out announcing the availability of the tool. Since that time, if I go to talk to a department or somebody on the research compliance team goes to talks to a department or at one of our school councils, which is essentially the decanal staff and all the department heads, we talk about it there. We talk about it wherever we can. We've just published some notes for PIs to talk with their research groups and their, individual advisees about a range of research compliance and research security issues, just so that they have something of a template or a script to speak from. We're publicizing those notes in a number of ways, but then referring to the tool as, hey, here's one, helpful tool. So we're just trying to blanket cover the terrain in as many ways as we can.
Okay. Lisa, this one's for you. Does use the risk matrix for unfunded agreements that include NDAs, MTAs, or DUA?
We're currently using it for any sponsored project proposal and any unfunded agreement. So it's a newer process for us than it is for MIT, but that's where we are right now.
Okay. This next one is for both of you, actually. It says, do either of your assessments consider the potential benefit of the international collaboration? Do you involve any faculty or other subject matter experts in assessing the benefits?
You want to start, Greg?
Oh, thanks. Candidly, in these, in the informal, when using the informal international collaborations tool, we don't really look at the benefits. We have this separate elevated risk process for things that are formally going through the institute, in which it would be the subject of a different conversation, but there is a process in which both the risks and very significantly the benefits and the risks of non-collaboration are all considered. With respect to the informal international collaborations tool, we're really just providing folks a bit of an aid to say, here are issues. I don't, and my staff doesn't have the capacity to determine, what type of technical benefits, or academic research benefits there might be. It's just way out of our swim lane to do that.
Okay. Lisa, did you want to respond?
Or yeah, I'll just mention that these are certainly questions that occur in collaboration with the faculty, with the researcher. I'm sorry, Doug, can I get the exact question? Because I'm reading these other questions. Thank you.
Hold on just a minute, because I'm getting
I should not do that.
Doug, I can read it.
okay.
Do either of your assessments consider the potential benefit of the international collaboration?
Thank you.
Do you involve faculty or other subject matter experts in assessing the benefits?
Right, absolutely. So, it's just a matter of really understanding, what any associated requirements might be, like what, for example, might, what data and materials are we talking about, whether there are any license or other requirements, and then just having a conversation, certainly with the researcher, regarding the collaboration. So it's not typically, that we would say, oh, you can't do something. These are the considerations or restrictions, and then having that conversation. So,
Okay.
but that it would include benefits, absolutely.
So this is actually for both of you as well, is that who has or which units have authority to tell faculty or units that they cannot proceed with an initiative or agreement based on either the collaboration tool or the agreement matrix? Guess I'll start with you, Greg.
Well, again, this, because the tool that I'm talking about is this informal international collaborations tool. So they're not actually wearing, the researcher isn't really wearing their MIT hat, right? It's not sponsored research. This is something they're doing on the side. We can point out, and again, because I don't reside in the Office of General Counsel, and I don't give individuals legal advice. I'm not giving them legal advice, but if somebody presented something that would present a clear legal challenge, I could say, be aware, this is how this organization, maybe this individual, is treated as a matter of American law. If it is an MIT-sponsored project, right, it's proposal to do some type of collaborative work, through our elevated risk process, what's known as the senior risk group could tell a PI, you may not proceed with this work. They would only do that after a meeting with the PI, in which the PI got to explain the benefits. There would be a discussion of the risks, et cetera, et cetera. But the senior risk group, which is comprised of the vice president for research, the general counsel of MIT, and the vice provost for international activities, they do have the authority to tell somebody, with respect to an MIT project, you may not proceed.
Lisa?
Say that we haven't had occasion to tell a researcher that they can't proceed. But similarly, to the extent that there were significant concerns and limitations, similarly, our leadership and general counsel would be engaged, and there would be conversations with the PI as well.
Okay, Greg, these are for you. Can you update the tool as you just, as a person seems fit to do that?
Could the person go back and say, edit the nature of their collaboration? The answer,
I think that's what they're asking.
if I'm understanding that, yeah, let's say originally it was just a bit of a discussion, and then they decided they were going to write an article together. They could come back and do that.
Okay. Is there a public link to the tool?
So the tool exists behind the firewall. And that's why I originally thought maybe I'd give everybody an active demonstration, but Zoom calls being what they were, I didn't want to have minutes of dead air while we struggled with some problem. It is behind our firewall, so it's not something that you can see just by going onto MIT's publicly available website. That's why in the slides, you'll see basically how we constructed it. And if anybody wants to talk about the construction of it, they could certainly reach out to me. I'm not the person who can answer the technical questions, but I could get you in touch with the right person.
So Greg, they're also asking, does the tool produce automatic recommendations, or is it an information intake tool?
It is an information intake tool. A human being has to then follow up on that.
Okay. Lisa, who initiates the matrix? Is it mandatory? Can you share completed samples? Do you generate a report that is shared with others?
So it's initiated, again, by an automated report that we get out of our sponsored projects office. And in terms of who completes it, our office, the compliance office completes it. And I'm just looking at the others. So it's from that perspective, it's not completed by the researcher or their team, or even the departmental staff. It's completed centrally, and so it's not something that's kind of mandatory for researchers. It's just kind of a service that's being provided. It's just another line of defense per se. I mean, obviously, again, we too hope that restricted party screening is occurring early in the process. We hope that the automated like batch screening that we do of sponsors, for example, is stopping these agreements before they would move forward without conversation. And again, not to stop them altogether, but to allow for conversation with, for example, the export control and research security staff. And so, you know, but this is, okay, just another opportunity for us to take a look at any potential research security risks. And so in terms of a completed sample, I mean, I'm happy to, you know, again, too, if you reach out to me, I'm happy to talk through it with you. I could, you know, we could probably mock up like a, you know, just a kind of dummy sample if that's, you know, I don't have one currently, but it's a good question. And, you know, in terms of like, oh, hey, well, what would this look like completed? That's something to consider. I mean, and I'd be open to that. Do we generate a report that's shared with others? We don't really. It's just something where we go ahead and we complete the review. And if there's something that needs to take place in terms of conversations or, you know, including a larger group of individuals, be it export controls or general counsel or others, then we take that step. But otherwise, we haven't been completing reports in this respect. But it's something to consider as well.
Okay. This is related to that, is that says, do either of you use both the tool and the matrix to assist in generating a risk assessment as a whole for the institution?
So the last time I reported to the Risk and Audit Committee of the board, I was telling them, you know, watch this space, something is coming. So the next time I'm asked to report to them, I will report on this as part of our overall risk assessment picture. I just haven't done it with data yet.
I guess I'd say not yet.
Okay. Let's see, Greg, since this is a tool, does someone on staff receive information each time faculty use the tool? If so, what do you do with that information?
Yeah, sorry, I probably wasn't very clear about this. Every time somebody hits the submit button, they put their information and they hit the submit button, it generates an email. That email goes to our export control officers, our compliance coordinator, and me. One of the four of us then responds to that. We do our due diligence check, and we then respond to the PI or whoever the researcher is. Fortunately, usually we've checked the tool, and the standard answer we give is, and no concerns were noted, right? If there is some level of concern, whether it's some type of ASPE advisory for an organization in China that we think is worth the PI or whoever taking a look at, or it's something more significant, it's a listed entity, et cetera, then we write in greater detail and always offer to have follow-up conversation with them.
Okay. Lisa, who within the University of Michigan reviews and makes determinations around risk levels in international agreements and activities? Are reviews handled entirely through the research compliance team, or are your sponsored project offices on the front line with higher risk agreements then being escalated to the research security office for deeper review?
So the compliance team, and I guess there's two different considerations. So there's, with respect to this risk matrix, it's entirely the compliance team. At the same time, we are also working into the system any language that comes through that relates to research security or risk reviews that would be flagged by our sponsored projects office for the compliance office to review. So that's something that is also getting built into our system now. Hopefully I've fully answered that question. Doug, let me know.
Okay. So here, there's a question, I guess it could apply to both. Is writing a paper together considered a reportable activity?
So certainly if somebody was thinking about co-authoring something with an international collaborator, I'm a little hung up on the word reportable. If they wanted to ask about, would there be any concern about that? Sure, they could certainly put that in. Again, there's not an obligation to use this tool. This is just there to help them.
Okay. And then I think this is the last one. What is your process for engaging in MOUs? With international MOUs, it is often difficult to discern what is actually happening under an MOU.
Lisa, do you
Greg,
want to?
would you like to take that?
Well, let me just say, actually, I was going to defer to Lisa in part because I think that the University of Michigan matrix is really good. But when we're looking at these issues, I think of this as at least, there might be more legs than three, but I think of it as at least a three-legged stool. We're looking at the nature of the research activity, right? Not all research activity is going to get the same level of scrutiny. We're looking at the country, right? And we're looking at the specific entity. I would say very much depending on what the nature of the research activity is, I think we'd go back and ask more questions. What do you, researcher, think the scope of this is? And again, that would really be whether it's an informal collaboration or something, if we didn't think we had enough information in the context of reviewing more structured, formal commitments or proposed commitments of the Institute, I think we'd go back and ask those questions. But let me defer, because I actually think, Lisa, this is kind of very well addressed by the matrix.
Yes, I will just say that, again, kind of we're more in early stages. And so I think with respect to MOUs, we've been reviewing those more in the context of foreign gift and contract reporting, less that have been coming across, with respect to new agreements that have been evaluated with this matrix. However, no, I think that, sure, it would just be kind of those overarching questions, I think, similarly would be considered, and, kind of whatever information was available with respect to the agreement that was being put in place, the MOU.
How closely do either of you work with your international offices with respect to both the tools and the recommendations?
You want to start, Greg?
Sure. So I'm going to take this kind of from an MIT perspective. We do work very closely with respect to our offices of international scholars and international students. Oftentimes these oftentimes would not come under the IIC tool that I've been talking about today. But we do work very closely, particularly with respect to potential visitors, and we're looking at the same types of issues. Is somebody proposing to bring in an international visitor from an organization that's listed on the entity list? Because we would then need to tell them, here are what the risks are, potential, and particularly with respect to, here's what you cannot do when that relationship comes to a conclusion and the person goes back to the home institution, for instance. I'm not sure that's addressing the person's question, but MIT doesn't have a huge kind of overseas structure. We do have a couple offices around the world. And we interact with them, although not so much specifically on the IIC tool. I will say that.
Okay. Can you give us a sense of volume and how many FTEs you have dedicated to responding to requests?
So assuming at least in part that comes to me, we've had a few hundred requests so far. I'd like to see that volume go up. Today, we have 4 people who, and that's me, and more frequently, our 2 export control officers and our compliance coordinator who respond to those questions. Sometimes we elicit some help from general counsel or from somebody else. FTEs, this is just stuff they do as part of their other responsibilities.
I guess, Greg, did you say in terms of a couple hundred agreements, did you initiate this in September of 2022? And so it's a couple hundred agreements since that time in terms of volume.
Yeah, a few hundred, yes, that's right.
Okay. And I'll just say, in terms of, the agreements that we see specific again to foreign countries of concern and sponsored proposals as well as unfunded agreements. It's a very small number on a weekly basis. It could be 1. It could be 0, really, because if you think about it, it's really China. We're not generally seeing anything from Russia, North Korea, or Iran. And so, the number that come in on a weekly basis is low. And so we do have 1 FTE that's fully dedicated to research security. And then, also, obviously, I'm very engaged there as well. But we don't have like a significant number of staff. Then, of course, we have an export control team, and our export control team currently consists of 5.5 FTE.
Okay. So, Greg, I think this one's for you. It's a very specific question, but Lisa, please chime in. So for informal international collaborations, if you have someone wanting to work with an entity list institution on an emerging technology and publish papers with them, citing awards to the institution, but with no institutional agreement with the entity list institution, would you put a hard stop on it?
I couldn't put a hard stop on it. It is not within the scope of the institution's responsibility to do that. I would make an impassioned plea, telling them all the reasons why I think this would not be beneficial to do this. And, obviously today, I hate to be in the business of scaring people, right? But obviously today, we have to tell people, think about the kind of the realities of what you're doing. And candidly, if you get federal funding, if you are looking forward to getting federal funding in the future, how is this going to appear to people? And that has been persuasive to people.
I would agree. I just, you can show an individual the DoD matrix, and, thank you to DoD for making that publicly available because it's very helpful. And I think the same message, it can be useful even in conversations regarding the Department of Energy that, this is something that the agencies are looking at with respect to their risk reviews. And so certainly you can compromise your federal funding if you were to enter into an outside activity like this. And that is, again, very persuasive.
Again, I keep saying the last one. I think this is the last one. Other than the FDP link assessment questionnaire, do you have risk assessment tools that help evaluate international entities that are not a COC?
Yeah, the answer is yes. I mean, we'd use a lot of the same, we would use a lot of kind of the generally available tools or the tools that we've purchased licenses for, but we make assessments, they're not part of our elevated risk process, but we make assessments with respect to both informal and formal collaborations for potential risk, including reputational risk, even if there's not a legal risk, from countries around the world.
Yeah. Lisa, how did you decide which countries would be L, M, or H risk? What led you to use the list that you did?
Sure. So we decided to go with, obviously comprehensively embargoed countries and the foreign countries of concern. And two, in terms of the matrix that we're using to try to understand it, I think it really is consistent with the designations that the U.S. government has made. So how has the U.S. government comprehensively sanctioned this country? Was it included in the CHIPS Act foreign countries of concern, or is it in this other list, the State Department list, for example? So I think in terms of levels of risk, I feel that the U.S. government set that level of risk, and I'd like to think that the matrix is consistent with that. So.
Okay. I think that's it, Sarah. So I
Yeah.
guess we'll go back to you.
Yeah, okay, great. And if any more questions come in, go ahead and just pop them right into the Q&A chat. So really quickly, I think we'll just move on to the next slide. We can stay on this just for one moment. I'm sorry, go back just for a moment here. It would be nice to hear from any of you if there's anything, unique about either Greg or Lisa's presentations and matrices that they presented and processes, tools that kind of varies from what you guys do at your home institutions. I don't know if anybody wants to kind of think about that and marinate on that. Did anything? Okay. But if anyone does, please pop it into the chat. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so we only have 6 minutes left. Should I just go ahead? What do we think for the first topic that participants?
That would be great, to the extent you can provide any information in the 6 minutes we have.
Yeah, of course, no problem at all. Okay, so what's been happening in research, security, implementation, recent developments, and then of course, anything latest on final NSPM 33. So I think probably many of you are tracking, really on February 14th, just last month, OSTP released guidance, finally requiring federal research funding agencies to begin implementation and using the harmonized common disclosure forms. That's for the BioSketch and the current pending other support. We're really excited. OSTP has been working really hard on this, and it's been hard getting agreement, but we have gotten there, and OSTP has released that guidance. So highlighting just specifically on that if they don't want to use the forms, they will have to kind of identify and specify what statute, regulation, some other authority or compelling reason why they can't abide by that. So hopefully this is going to be making it easier for the community. Right now, agencies have 90 days to be developing implementation plans, and we are providing those back to OSTP. Really quick, small thing, but kind of maybe a big thing for some of you. We're really excited. NSF has been working for a couple of years trying to join ORCID, the ORCID Consortium, and we actually are now in the process of doing so. So fingers crossed. We're hoping once we join, really this is going to help better integrate nsfresearch.gov with kind of PAR functionality and ORCID records. So hoping that might reduce a little bit of a burden as well in proposal submissions and annual reporting. CHIPS and science updates. I think as Lisa is one of the people who worked on the amazing research security training modules, they went public on January 31st. And then again, this is the research security training requirement in CHIPS and science, this will essentially satisfy that requirement. These modules are not required, of course, but this was an effort by the US government, not only NSF, but NIH, DOE, and DoD funded through 4 cooperative agreements. The community, including our very own Lisa Nichols, worked to develop these modules in coordination with subject matter experts in the government. They're live, they're free, they're easy to integrate. And again, so this will be satisfying the requirement in CHIPS and science for the research security training requirement. This will not be required until the 2025 PAPG becomes effective. And I will also note that this research security training, this can be integrated into the RECR training, the responsible conduct of research training, because per the amendment in CHIPS of the amendment of the Competes Act, there is now a research security training requirement in RECR, and that will also not become effective until the 2025 PAPG. So I just wanted to highlight that. Also, Malign Foreign Talent Program is coming up. That prohibition is going to become effective in just a couple months. That's in the 2024 PAPG, so that'll become effective on May 24th of this year. And again, that'll be a prohibition. I know there's been a lot of dispute on this. OSTP also on February 14th, they released 2 memos, one on the common forums, the other being on the Malign Foreign Talent Prohibition and other talent programs. We only have a
Sarah,
couple.
can I
Yeah,
just
I
ask
know.
a question about
Yeah.
that super
Yeah, yeah,
quick?
sure, sure. Yeah,
So, so on that date, within Science CV, that Malign certification will then be present for the PI. So is that correct?
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct. Mhm, yep.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, great. And then, I mean, I know we only have 1 minute left. I'll just say Secure Center, it's underway, hoping to make that award August of this year. And then also for the foreign financial disclosure reporting requirement, I know there's been a lot of chatter about that. Again, I just want to highlight that that first reporting requirement will be due July 31st of this year. And that'll be for all NSF recipient institutes of higher education that receive a new NSF award or funding amendment after May 24th of this year. And then they'll have to be reporting for the entire year prior. So happy to provide some more specifics on that. I think that FDP, we should maybe do some FAQs on that. I know we've been chatting about that, working collaboratively with NSF, because I know there have been some questions. We're planning on the website that we have been building will become available to start demoing in May of this year as well. So we'll be providing information on that to kind of get used to the new system, and we'll be doing quite a bit of outreach on that. So look forward to that in the coming months. Okay, that's it for me. We have like 30 seconds left.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank everybody for attending the webinar. Remember, this is being recorded and the slides will be on the FTP webpage, and I guess there's a lot more to come. So thank you again and have a great afternoon.
And thanks, Greg. Thanks, Lisa. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Take care.